So we are going to be doing a valve adjustment on this, but I have to let it cool down. So I just wanted to bring it in here. It's really not that warm. Obviously, it barely ran just driving it in here, but I want it to be perfectly cold. You want to do the valve adjustment when it's absolutely cold. So, you know, it hasn't been running in a long time. So we're going to let this sit for a while and I'm going to do some other things around here, and then we'll start the valve adjustment on this thing. Right, first thing I'm going to do is get this air cleaner out of my way. I've already taken the liberty of removing the nut up here. Go ahead and pop these clips, which I do believe they're supposed to be, oh, there we go. I think they're supposed to be 4, and yeah, there is. One's missing over here. I love this air cleaner. I love that it's, you know, an old school, just like big round air cleaner like you'd see on top of a V8. Actually, basically, the Mercedes-Benz V8s have the same basic air cleaner. Big old beauty. There's 3 bolts that hold this air cleaner assembly on here, and when it's running, so like 2 of them are broken. They've been broken since I got this thing. And when it's running, it sounds like a snare drum. It's just sitting there really making a serious vibration. Now only at idle, and then when you put your hand on it, it goes away. But the thing is, I'm kind of glad those 2 other ones are broken, because they would be a real pain to get to if they weren't. It only has the one over here holding it on. It's kind of funny because I really like that it's all stock. It hasn't been messed with. Usually, you see these for sale sometimes, and they got a pod filter, like just an intake. And I'm struggling to not do that myself. It's in my blood to modify cars, like anything. You see what I do, modify tractors. I have a motorcycle that I have modified. You guys haven't really seen yet. I don't really ride anymore, but anyway, that's besides the point. I want to modify this. I want to put a nice sounding exhaust on, straight pipe exhaust on it, because it's a turbo diesel. You gotta have a straight pipe. But at the same time, it is really good the way it is. It's actually cool that it has the original, I believe they're original mufflers on there. It sounds great stock. It has a nice sound to it. It's not like it's silent. And it has all of this original equipment, but knowing what I know and having a bit of experience with turbocharged engines, the way that this inlet is set up into the turbo is very restrictive. Now, if it was just a naturally aspirated car, it wouldn't be that big of a deal the way that that is. But turbochargers are particularly sensitive to airflow on the inlet and the outlet. So the turbine housing, the outlet, could benefit. Now on this car, it looks pretty good, but most turbo cars can benefit greatly from like a larger, more free-flowing downpipe. And of course, the inlet is a big thing on a turbocharger. Same on a supercharger. Even a supercharger, the inlet is very, very important and can gain you a lot of power if you have a good flowing inlet. But it's not to mention the best part about an intake or a better flowing intake other than stock, and that is the sound. And I drove this thing, I briefly, just up the road and back, I drove this with no air cleaner hooked up at all, just straight open turbo, because I was working on it. It was when I was doing the SLS suspension diagnosis, and I had all this out of the way, and so I drove it up the road. Man, it sounds really cool with the turbo wide open, and it would basically sound almost as good as that with just like a tube and a pod filter. But you got to have a cold air intake, and this original intake is effectively a cold air intake because the tube goes right here to the front and sucks air from over here. You don't want to have a pod filter under the hood, and there's really not any room for it. If it didn't have the SLS tank, that'd probably be where the filter would go. That's where most people put them on like regular 300D sedans. But I wouldn't want to do that. Actually kind of looks like there would be enough room up in the fender here. Possibly, I don't know, it's hard to say. Because like on the Mustangs, the Fox bodies, they have the hole in the fender, and that's originally OEM, that's where the airbox goes to. And even aftermarket, they'll send the pipe right through there. And yeah. Go ahead and stop me anytime you want. Just tell me to stop talking and get to work, because I know I gotta just keep on talking and telling you things that are kind of irrelevant, but they're interesting to me, so hopefully they're interesting to you. Let me get this thing off of here. Just like that. Okay. Oh wait, that's gonna come out of there too. There we go. And there she is. See, now what I was talking about is this 90 or 180 degree elbow here. It's kind of like ovalized, which of course it being ovalized is because of the clearance in it. It's still effectively as big as it would be. But that being a 180 degree bend right into the turbo is not ideal. And even more so where it goes, oh wow, yeah, the real pancake situation going up under here and into here. Definitely a flow restriction on this air cleaner. But it just looks so cool and original. And there's the little KKK. Are we allowed to say that? I mean, it's literally the, you know, it's literally the manufacturer of the turbo. Most German cars from this era, and frankly, actually, not even just this era, most German cars for many decades used, if they were turbocharged, used KKK turbos. It is a German manufacturer. Yeah, I believe it's a T3. But being a KKK, I don't know if it would just be considered a T3. I think it has another designation, but it has like basically a T3 flange. Notice it also has a 4-bolt outlet, which is kind of unusual. 4-bolt outlet on the downpipe, and it has direct port diesel injection. It actually has a pretty nice looking downpipe on it. You know, it's really not much improvement could be had there besides making it a 3-inch, and with a turbo, I guess it looks like it could probably take a 3-inch downpipe, but again, I don't know how much difference you'd really see with that particular turbo. Very cool looking wastegate down there, real beefy, nice cooling fins on it, pretty interesting wastegate actuator. So is that an external gate, or is that just the gate actuator? I think it's sort of like an external gate, but it's also just the wastegate actuator, I should say. Of course, these are not intercooled. They never were intercooled, and it's actually kind of a pain. You really have to do some kind of like custom things or part swapping to intercool them, because the way this turbo actually connects to this intake manifold, there's a little internal slip fit kind of coupler in there with an O-ring on either side. And so you could actually clock the turbo this way and then put a silicone coupler on this. But from what I've researched, I'm pretty certain you can't really get a silicone coupler onto here because of the clearance of the compressor housing when it actually ends up clocked. And one thing that you can do is get a manifold from an NA, naturally aspirated OM617. And there's a couple different versions of that. There's the version that would come on this car, which has a long runner, and it has basically it's right at the top flange, like a tube flange, like you could put a coupler right to it, but it's directly on top pointing up. So it wouldn't be ideal, you know, the pipe would have to come make a 90 degree and come wherever. Now the manifold to get, but it's a bit more expensive, is actually from a W115 or a W116. I think W116, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty close. And that is actually the very first car that came with the OM617. See, they did not have turbochargers on the OM617 for a couple years or a few years. The OM617 5-cylinder 3-liter is pretty much the same. Ooh, I'm getting screwed up on the lighting here. So the OM617 3-liter 5-cylinder is pretty much the same basic engine architecture as the 2.4-liter OM616 that was in the 240D. And before the 617 was designed, that 4-cylinder design lived for many years, like decades. Very similar anyway. And in the mid to late 70s, a man called Ferdinand Piëch, who would later be responsible for the Bugatti Veyron, was brought on. He was hired at Mercedes-Benz, and one of his main jobs was to find a way to get more power from the Mercedes diesel engine, but within the same size chassis layout, and they had the 4-cylinder 2.4 liter diesel. And his best way of doing that was add one more cylinder. So Ferdinand Piëch, in doing that, created and designed the very first automotive, actually I think very first in general, no matter what, 5-cylinder engine. And no less, it was a diesel 5-cylinder engine, and it was naturally aspirated at first. There was no turbocharger. So Mercedes-Benz themselves were responsible for turbocharging the engine a few years after it was introduced. So the 240D 4-cylinder was never turbocharged throughout its existence. This was naturally aspirated at first with about 77 horsepower. Then in 79 was the first time they put a turbocharger. So this engine came out in, I think, 75 or 76, I want to say. I could be a couple years off on that, but I think it was 75 or 76 that the 617 was introduced. Naturally aspirated up until 79. Then they turbocharged it. From turbocharging it in 79, it went from 77 horsepower to about 100 horsepower. And then by the time it got to this year, 1983, this is as powerful as this engine got, which is 123 horsepower. And the most impressive thing is the 184 pound-feet of torque. Now, if you look into any specs of 1983 cars, that is a very, very impressive figure for a 3-liter 5-cylinder diesel, because you could buy American cars with V8s. Like a 302 V8 in a Ford was about 130 horsepower. You could get a Cadillac with a 4.5 or so liter V8 that had 125 or 130 horsepower. There was a lot of really, really weak, large displacement engines being sold in the early 80s, late 70s into the early mid 80s, and the Mercedes-Benz diesels were very, very impressive for what they were. And anyway, so going back to the Ferdinand Piëch designed and created the very first 5-cylinder engine at Mercedes-Benz. After he left Mercedes, he went and worked for Audi in the early 80s, and guess what? He also had a hand in creating the Audi 5-cylinder. So the Audi 5-cylinder came after the Mercedes 5-cylinder diesel, and the Audi 5-cylinder gas engine was the same guy. The same guy actually designed that. And actually, interestingly, I found out more recently that Audi also had a 5-cylinder diesel, but it was only, I think, a 2-liter, and it made much less horsepower than this. I think like 90 horsepower or something like that. And actually, it was not turbocharged, but it might have been also turbocharged, but they were typically naturally aspirated. Another interesting fact is, if you think about it, how many old Mercedes-Benz do you see from this era that are diesel, right? Most of them, right? You see so many of these that are diesel, and very, very rarely do you see a gas-powered. There was a lot of different engines. Well, there was a few different engines available in these. This is considered an E-class. So there was a 280E, which had an inline-six 2.8 liter naturally aspirated gas engine. And then there was a 230E, which had a 2.3 liter naturally aspirated gas 4-cylinder. And those are just, I've seen the 230. I've seen one European spec 230 for sale on Marketplace. And I have not seen any 280s for sale because they're pretty much just Euro cars, gray market Euro cars. Very rarely, I don't even know if they really, I'm sure they sold some American spec. Now, keep in mind, this is actually a Euro spec car. This has the small Euro bumpers, no EGR. That's another thing that shows that this is definitely a Euro spec car. The EGR valve and all that would be right here on the coming off the exhaust and going into the intake. This is a Euro spec setup, Euro bumpers front and rear. But anyway, around 90, I think it's 90% of Mercedes-Benz sold in the U.S. as U.S. spec cars were diesel powered. And the reason for that was the CAFE standard, the standard fuel economy, corporate average fuel economy, CAFE. And we still have that till this day. It's what's causing every manufacturer to go to an electric car. And it is basically that the fleet of cars, throughout the fleet of cars that a manufacturer sells, they must have a certain average fuel economy achieved by all those cars combined. So during the 80s, when Mercedes-Benz was delivering cars to the U.S., the only way they could actually meet the U.S. standard CAFE spec was to give us pretty much all diesel cars, because the diesels got much better fuel economy. Because of course their other offerings, like the 280 engine in all of their body styles, you get an SL Roadster, an SLC Coupe, both of which were available with the 2.8 inline six gas engine. Then there was the 450 SL, and then later the 380 SL, all with V8s, naturally aspirated V8s. Those were obviously the SL Roadster. The big body W126, and previous before that the W116, I think it was, the big S-Class cars, those had V8s in them. Those were the top dog cars were the V8s. 4.5 liter, 3.8 liter, 5 liter, and later on into the mid to late 80s, 5.6 liter. And those cars in Europe were very powerful. The 560 SEC had 300 horsepower in Europe. The one we got only had 230 horsepower. And so, like I said, because their other cars were big inline six and big V8, very poor fuel mileage, the diesels were the cars that really gave them the advantage here as far as the fuel economy. And then of course the 240D, which could get about 30 miles to the gallon with its 68 horsepower, or was it 60? No, I think 71 horsepower from the 2.4 liter naturally aspirated four cylinder. And a lot of those are manual transmission, which is really cool. So that is your long-winded history lesson on the 5-cylinder OM617, its counterparts, and the history of Mercedes-Benz diesels in the U.S. I hope you enjoyed that, because I sure enjoyed talking about it. Now that I've done nothing, let's get back to work, because I'm going to be working on this thing all night if I'm freaking at this rate. Alright, so don't lose me here. Pop that guy off the cruise control. We'll go ahead and pop these two linkages off of the pump linkage. And then it looks like we just got, 4 bolts. And we'll remove the entire linkage assembly mount off of the top. Leave that cable connected, and that whole thing should just flop over that way. See if I can do this in one hand. Oh yeah, they're easy. See, is that easy? I like that. And of course they can only go to one spot. So often I yacht. Looks like 12 mils. Oh no, they're actually, 13 or 14? Well, quickest one I can find is a 14, so there we go. It's a 13, figures. And you know what's funny? The very first socket I grabbed and saw was a 13 before I grabbed the 12. There it is. So often I yacht. I wish my car still had sound. My car radio. Alright, there we are. There we are. Carson trying to hold the camera. You might be thinking I got a freaking GoPro on my head or something, but oh, come on, I can't do... There's freaking wobbly extension, and I'm trying to hold on to the freaking camera at the same time. Yeah, you be knowing about it. Man! Oh, don't break, you mother effer. Oh, boy. Well, that's interesting. Oh! Oh my god, have they ever freaking checked the valves in this thing? It's got 243,000 or something like that miles on it, so they should have, because it's every 12. I think it's every 12,000 every year, basically. You're supposed to check the valves and adjust them. Actually, they definitely at some point did, because I got service records, handwritten records that the some like original owner took in the glove box in the back of the owner's manual. And it's definitely shows a valve adjustment, or mentions a valve adjustment, but you know when it was? It was like 1988 or something like that. So who knows in the later years, whenever somebody else owned this car. I don't know how many owners it had. I don't know, when that original owner got rid of it. But it has service records, handwritten, for a lot of the different things that were, oil change at this many miles, valve adjustment at this many miles, all handwritten. You can barely even read the handwriting, and it's from like the 80s. Like it had like over 100,000 miles, or even 150,000 by like 1988 or 89. And it's an 83. All right. These. Set it over here. There we go. Now we got the firing orders on there. It's in German. What does that say? Zunavogel. 12453. Alright, so mentioned the bolt down there, so there's obviously two. You can see there's two Allen-headed bolts holding that link on. Well, that's going to be a bit of a pain to get to with the link in the way, so I just figured out the probably more appropriate way to do this. So there's the actual linkage that comes up to this pivot, and that actually goes down to the throttle pedal deal. So look, just one appears to be 10 millimeter, one fastener. It actually just slips in right there, and then it's got a pin, and that should pop right out of there. And then maybe we can even inspect the bushing in here, because there's a bush in here that actually is known to go bad and give some play, but I don't think there's really a tremendous amount of play, so it's probably fine. So yeah, we'll just pop that pin in that bolt. That'll separate us, and we'll just remove the entire valve cover, or the valve cover with this connected to it. Then if we do want to polish it, then we'll go ahead and remove that separately. And so much time would be saved if I had a freaking impact gun. Here we go. Awesome. Oh, come on now, freaking return hose. Come on, what is it not clearing? What is it not? It's not that return hose that's stopping me, something else is. What is going on here? Let me look at it from that side. No, there ain't shit over here. Unless it's the stud. No. What is... Oh, is there something in the back? I doubt it. No, there's nothing back there that should be holding up. Nothing. That's not. What is holding me out here? Is your gasket sticking? I don't know. Oh, is it that freaking? No. There she is. No. Oh, my freaking glasses are falling off. Well, help me understand, as Vice Grip Garage would say. Freaking, so that studs. There she goes. You just gotta find it. find the frickin' way here. Don't want to frickin'. Oh, come on. There we go. You know, in the frickin' world of my car. Oh, this is a damn gasket, isn't it? No, the gasket's all the way around. There she is. Oh, alright, I was hearing me. What is holding me on? Oh man. Some damn cam lobes. Alright, now a freaking injection line's holding me on. The return line. No, something in the front. What in the world? There she is. I think it was the gasket that was stuck. Yeah, it's a very interesting setup here. So basically it's got like a rocker shaft and rocker arms, but yet they're not really rocker arms in the sense that they're actually, instead of, you know, like a typical rocker arm acting on the valve like this, they're just underneath the cam acting directly onto the valve, which is interesting because, you know, you would think it would be with the overhead cam, they could just do a direct to the valve, but I mean, this is somewhat early overhead cam technology. I mean, overhead cams had been around since the 20s, I think, but in very limited high-end cars. But you know, by the late 70s, mid 70s into the 80s is when overhead cams really started becoming normal mainstream stuff. Of course, Mercedes had overhead cams for a very long time. Certainly gotta figure out what's going on, if we got, you know, too much play in our timing chain or anything. Alright, so the way to truly determine timing chain stretch on these things is by bringing the timing marks in a line with top dead center number 1 and seeing if you are at 0 on the balancer after getting the marks lined up here. And typically, you know, like say within like 2 degrees or so will be okay. If it's beyond that, then the timing chain is stretched, and that means the injection pump, the timing for the injection pump is off, the cam timing is off. It's not going to be running as good as it is. And you know what, with how this thing kind of vibrates at idle and how it's hard cold starting, even when it's warm out, I'm going to say that this is part of our issue. And here you go, look at this. Without even doing the check, I can right away tell. See how much I can move that? That's quite a bit of movement right there. I should basically not be able to move that. It should be pretty tight on the top here. So I already know this thing's going to need a timing chain. Alright, so getting the engine turned over with a bar in order to get that timing checked. Got to get the fan and the shroud off. One thing, I like the way this shroud is on here. There's just a couple of little clips that pop off, and then it just, on the bottom, it's just 2 little tabs are slid in. So all you can do is take these 2 tabs off and the shroud will slide right up and out of there. Of course, you got to get the fan off, which is the pain in the butt. I'm glad though that it doesn't have like a nut on the front like some newer cars have. This is more like how my Mustang was, the old 302, where it just has a 4-bolt flange holding the fan on. I don't know if you could see that very well. But I'll tell you what, it is still a real pain. Like literally, it hurts. I got the nuts all broke, the bolts all broke loose with a little 10mm wrench, and you know, just gotta have like the right angle and get my arm down in here. And I'll tell you what, getting them off is one thing. Getting them back on, getting the holes lined up and getting them back on, that is going to be even worse. But got to get it out of there in order to do this and get that turned over. So, of course, you know, just to check the valves, I could just turn it over with the key, bump it, and get it to where it needs to be. But in order to actually get this timing checked, I need to be able to bar it over slowly. So that has to be done. Okay, we are just about to get this timing checked. Fan and shroud are out of the way. Water pump pulley off. I had to get all that out of the way. The belts were in the way kind of, and it was just hard to see the balancer. So you can, if I get the angle of the light just right, maybe you could see that, you know, there's the marks. 0 degrees we're looking for on the balancer. And I have not pulled it into place yet. So, of course, you'll know that it's coming up on number 1 based on where the cam lobes are, being that they won't be activating the valves. Combining that with the fact that it's almost up on 0 degrees and the mark is almost there. So, there's the mark we're looking for. See that tiny little... You see the notch in the washer right behind the gear is going to rotate and land to where that little bump is on the cam tower. We're going to look at that as we slowly rotate the engine, and that is what we want to line up. We don't want to worry about the 0 degree yet on the balancer. We just want to line that mark up, and then we will examine where we ended up down at the balancer. And that will tell us, that'll tell us about the timing chain stretch, and we'll know how far off it is, how many degrees off it is. I am guessing it's going to be a few degrees off, because this timing chain does, by just touching it, grabbing it, seem like it is quite stretched. Which is interesting, because I've heard of some of these having 300,000-400,000 miles on them and still having a good original timing chain. But that's not always the case. I mean, it depends on the maintenance, you know, how much was the oil change and all that. So we'll get that timing checked, and then we will move on to the valve adjustment. Oh, these are on into place. Of course, it's a little bit tougher because it's got full compression with, you know, everything's in there. The glow plugs and the injectors are all in place. It'd be easier if they were out, but I'm not doing anything with those right now, so I'm not going to go that far. And I don't want to go past, because then I'll have to go all the way around again. You don't want to turn it backwards. Come on, baby. It's tough to get that little... Oh, come on. I think I went a hair too far. Alright, so now I definitely got it as close as it's possibly going to get. Kind of maybe see it better. Come on, focus. It's hard to get in there and get you the angle. So where it actually, there you go. You can kind of see that's like pretty much as perfect as it's going to be lined up. Both cam lobes off, and we're going to see right now where we're at. All right, we're not as bad as I thought. On camera, it might look better, so let me try to look at it with my own eyes. That's actually only, well, it's still a lot. I think that's 3 degrees maybe. Still might be 4. I mean, somewhere around 3 or 4 degrees. All right, so configuration here is a little interesting because the way this 5-cylinder is laid out. Exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust, exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust, exhaust, intake. So first one I got on the base circle was right about where I had it when I had the engine where it was, and it's already off. It's tight. So got 14 thousandths is the spec for the exhaust on a turbo. The naturally aspirated one is different, but here we have a turbo. So 14 thousandths, and it is not fitting in there at all. Now, typically you would think a valve adjustment that's been neglected might have loose valves, and I would think with it having noisy valve train, or maybe has noisy valve train, I don't know how it should sound, that would have said, I thought I would see loose valves. Now, of course, I've only checked one. It's tight. But, like I said before, these are known to have loss of power and loss of compression when they're neglected on a valve adjustment, and that would tell me it would be a tight valve. So you can see right in there the 14 millimeter. You got to get 2 wrenches in there to loosen that up, and turning it down, like turning it in, will increase the clearance. And just on a quick side note, where you start and where you end, there's really no right or wrong way to do a valve adjustment. It's however you prefer it. Now, I just checked that one first because it was already right on the base circle, but I'm actually not even going to adjust that yet. I'm going to rotate the engine around until I get to my first valve, and I'm just going to work my way right on down the line by rotating the engine where it needs to be by hand, because I don't want to lose track and then have to be spinning this thing over a million times and checking ones that I think I didn't know if I did or not. So I like to just go right in a line and get them done that way. All right, so once again, we got a tight valve, and I've just checked it. It's off by 2. So exhaust valve should be at 14 thousandths on this turbocharged OM617, and it is at 12 thousandths is the max I can fit in there. So we're 2 thousandths off on that one. And it's likely going to be similar, I'm sure, for most of them. And maybe that little bit of tightness will be a loss of compression on startup and actually help it start better. Obviously, the 3.5 degree pump, 3.5 degree timing misalignment with the stretch chain is not great, but I'm hoping this valve adjustment makes a big difference. And one of the other things I still got to do is a diesel purge, which may also really help the startup of this thing. Because interestingly, I mean, it runs great down the road. It has power. It pulls good. It's more just it kind of idles rough, and it is hard starting. And it's a little bit clacky and noisy, which makes me suspect that maybe an injector is an issue. So definitely something I don't want to let go too long. But maybe one of these valves is actually loose, and that's where the clacking is coming from. Of course, I've only checked 2 now, so we'll get back to you when we are done, because honestly, you don't really need to... There's plenty of videos out there on how to adjust valves. I mean, it's honestly as simple as it gets. You loosen up the 2 nuts, you turn it until you get your feeler gauge to slide in there perfectly with just a tiny bit of resistance, but to where you can't get a bigger one in there. And that's it. It's that simple. Check it out. So I was looking for a really short... Oh, come on. So I was looking for a really short... You bastard. I was looking for a really short 14 mil wrench to make this happen. You know what this is? This is pretty cool. This is actually from a Honda motorcycle original toolkit. See that? That's Honda Motor Company. That's their old logo from all the... So this is probably like 70s or 80s. Maybe even earlier, 60s or 70s. Made by RK. So the bike would have came with... you know, like a selection of these, like a 10 and a 12, 14, 17, I actually have a full complete toolkit with my Magna that has basically the same wrenches with the same logos on them. Pretty cool. So you can see how much of a pain it is to get on these, but it's possible. I just broke that one loose already. They actually sell, when I say they, there's two different sources that I know of. Mercedes source and another company, I can't think of the name, small company that sells bent wrenches. He's like, oh, you're gonna need these bent wrenches, it's absolutely critical. And they custom wrenches that he makes, and they got rubber handles on them, and they come up like this and then like this, and you just sit here like that. You don't need those. I mean, granted, the front cylinder is going to be a lot harder than the rest of them, and the back cylinder might be a bit harder, but I think it's kind of silly to think you need special wrenches for this. All right, I take it back. Lord help me the next time I have to do this valve adjustment if I don't have the special bent wrenches. Yeah, it's freaking annoying. All right, so of course I had to polish the valve cover. It's aluminum, so you pretty much have to polish it. It's off. It's best time to do it. So before this point here, I didn't record. I actually put a tremendous amount of work into sanding this thing just to get it here, cleaning it and sanding it. I started out with a Scotch-Brite pad and some solvent, some gasoline, just to get the grease off of it and kind of sand the grease or the black stuff. I mean, this thing was just... It's hard to tell in the first couple clips when it's on the engine, like how bad this thing looked. It was super dark and gray. And so I started out with 320 grit. In fact, I only had what I had laying around, so I didn't like source the actual things that I needed to do this. So what I had laying around was 320 grit and 280 grit. So I started with some 280 grit. And I think I said 320 before, but I meant 280. I started with 280, and then I went to 320. And, yeah, eventually I just got it to the point where I hit it with some Mother's Mag aluminum polish. Not sponsored. That's just what I've always used. And, of course, I didn't film a lot of that, so you don't actually see me polish it here. We're just going to jump to the point where it's actually beautiful and polished. All right, there it is. That is looking brilliant. I just love polishing aluminum. I actually don't love polishing aluminum. I love the result that comes after you're done polishing the aluminum. You know, it's not perfect. It's actually quite far from perfect, but it's going to be amazing looking under the hood of this thing. And actually, you can see, let me bring it outside. Maybe I can show you. I wanted to see it in here too, because it's hard to tell what lighting is better to get an actual representation of what it looks like. So I'll show you. Here's where I got lazy. This is totally invisible, totally not able to be seen at the back of the engine. This is how it looked, though. This is how the entire thing looked. This super dark gray, real dull. And so... yeah, it was actually quite a bit of work to get it to that point, and I am really happy with that. It looks amazing. All right, well, here we have the air cleaner lid. I'm not patient enough to completely prep this out. It would take me forever. So I just hit it with a wire brush to clean it up a little bit. Still got a bunch of texture on it, but it's going to look better than it did. Hit it with some wax and grease remover. All I have is satin black. We'll see how that looks. If it's too flat, then I have some clear coat maybe I could throw on it to make it shine a little bit better. But now that I have the polished valve cover, this is right next to it and it's going to look like crap. So try to polish a turd as much as you can with what we got right now. 2 minutes. 2 minutes to shake the can. You want to do it for 2 minutes minimum. That is the rule. Alright, I'll admit I didn't do it for 2 minutes. I don't have the patience. Nice light coat to start with. So hopefully this nozzle's not messed up. Alright, second coat going on. There she goes. Oh yeah. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Oh, that is freaking amazing. Yeah, dude. Surrounded by a bunch of dirty, ugly stuff that needs to be polished, but or cleaned at least. Some of which needs to be painted, but gotta love a nice polished valve cover to brighten things up. I figured I'd just show you the money shot dropping that beauty on there. Got this done. That's definitely shinier than I thought it was going to be, so that's fine. And the lower portion, the main portion of the air cleaner, I started painting. Still got to turn that over and touch it up from the other side. And yeah, I'm just going to throw this back together, and then I'm going to see how we made out. Start it up, get some heat into it. And there it is. She is 100% back together. So in the future, I'm gonna want to take all this apart and paint this piece. That's, you know, a lot of ugly stuff to go on my beautiful polished valve cover, but it is still quite an improvement. It is kind of funny though, like it's harder to tell on camera, but in person it looks like this beautiful shiny gem amongst a whole bunch of dirty, worn out stuff. And yeah, the air cleaner didn't come out too bad. I mean, it still looks rough, but I'm happy with it. Let's fire this beauty up. Look at that, isn't that lovely? That looks so much better than when I started. Seems okay now. It still sounds just as like the same as it did before. It's seems about the same as it was. Still smoking a bit. If anything, it almost seems like it's smoking worse, but actually once it warms up, it smokes a little bit less than that. You hear that clacking? I believe that's an injector in need of replacement, so I think the injectors need to be rebuilt or replaced. Frankly, I'm a little disappointed. I thought I was going to have some quick starting, smooth running action here, but it's basically exactly how it was before I touched it. I know it's not any worse. It can't be. So, oh well. I guess we'll probably have to put some heat in it and drive it and see how it is. No doubt in my mind it's missing. It's shaking really bad and it's smoking a lot. That's freaking ridiculous. What the heck has gone wrong here? I'm gonna have to freaking take it all apart again probably and double check the valve adjustment. That sucks. Seems like it clears right up the second you give it throttle. Alright, well, let's go up the road and see if it feels like at least under some load. I can't tell so far. Seems like it still has power. Like it doesn't seem like it's, you know, down on power, like actually missing under load. It's up to temperature now. Doesn't make sense though. I mean, if I take it apart and I find an obvious valve adjustment that's off, then it'll make sense. As of right now, from what I know I did, it doesn't make sense. Still pulling, like it still has good power, but I don't like that idle, man. I don't know. And the only thing I did was mess with the valve adjustment, so it has to be related to the valve adjustment. nothing else that could be causing it to idle so bad and smoke. It's obviously not happy on one particular cylinder, which means I probably misadjusted, or like I said, I thought I had it perfectly adjusted and I should have rotated the engine all the way through and then checked it again. Well, there you go. That's my embarrassment of the video. I'm just gonna have to, you know, just gonna have to take it all back apart again, and next time you guys will find out what I found, because I am not gonna obviously make an entire other video based on that. You're just gonna get what I got here. I mean, it frickin' rips still. It's pulling really good. And the only thing is, like I said, it's just, normally it would clear up at this point, if anything. If like lately it's been idling pretty good. But now it's just like, yeah, I don't know. When I get back to the house, we'll see how it's idling. As of right now, just driving it, it feels all right under load and under, you know, RPM. It's not overheating. I got good linear, you know, mid-range throttle here. Really loud, like, I know that was there before, but it's not smoking as bad. And typically that is how the idle sounds. You know what I mean? It's not like, it's a 5-cylinder, so it's gonna have a little bit of a thumpy idle. It does seem better than when we left. Like, you know, like before the engine was like really bumping around. Now it seems okay. Well, it's definitely not running as rough, or rough pretty much at all, like it was in the beginning of when we started it, but now more than anything, there's noises that are bothering me that may or may not have been there before, that kind of cowbellish kind of noise. I was thinking about it, it really isn't that much work to check the valves again. The only reason why I did so much more, you know, removing the fan and the shroud, if you remember, that was because I wanted to check the engine timing. I wanted to check the cam timing, which tells you your chain stretch, and I don't need to do any of that now. In order to actually check the timing, I just need to pull, you know, get the air cleaner back out of my way, remove the throttle linkage, and then the valve cover will come off, and then I could just use the starter to bump the engine over to just double check my adjustments. Of course, I can't do that unless it's cold, so it would have to sit overnight until I can do it tomorrow or whenever. Today's Saturday, so probably I'll end up working on it again tomorrow. But right now, I would consider it drivable. I mean, it revs up fine, it clears, the noise kind of goes away. I'm going to change the oil. But hey, at least the valve cover's shiny, right? That is, we got a shiny valve cover, but the engine's still not happy for some reason. Even though that's the weird thing. The engine was happy, and now it seems less happy. We got a nice painted air cleaner and a shiny valve cover out of this thing. What do you guys think? Did I get one of the valve adjustments wrong? I don't think so. Because they were, like, I also just don't think a thousandth or two would even make that big of a difference, but I'm certain I got the valve adjustment all good. It's just that what I didn't do was rotate the engine back through and double check all of them again. I don't think I'm going to find anything. I think it's just going to be what it is. I honestly think there's injector issues going on here, and for whatever reason, maybe because there's more compression now, because the valve adjustment is good, the injector being an issue is more of an issue. I don't know. If you guys know anything about it, let me know what you think. Always curious to hear you guys' opinion, and it definitely helps when I get other people's opinions on this kind of stuff. No matter what the subject, you know, more eyes on the situation always helps. Gets more brains working, and you know, by then I may have already figured it out. But all right, well, I had a chance to drive it about 10 miles into town and back, 10-mile round trip. It's idling just as good as it always did. It's not rough like it was before. So tomorrow morning, I am going to just check the valve adjustment and make sure it's good. I really don't think it's going to be anything. I don't think any of them are going to be off, but I will just double check tomorrow when it's cold. So I'm going to pull it in the shop and just get up early and check that. But it's running good. I mean, it's running just as good as it was. It pulls strong. As you could probably hear, it's idling as smooth as it was before. And I guess I looked back at some videos of the way it sounded before. It basically had that cowbell clacking sound before. I don't know if they all sound like that or if it's just this one, but I definitely think it's going to need rebuilt injectors. It definitely has that kind of like snapping, clacking diesel knock to it at idle. But either way, she's a beauty though. I love that thing. So I said it already, I think, but thank you guys who are subscribed and who watch. I really appreciate it. And if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. Like the video, comment down below, and yeah, see you guys next time.